The Arizona sun bore down mercilessly on Triple R Ranch, turning the horizon into a wavering mirage of heat and broken promises. Mason Reed stood motionless atop his watchtower, Winchester rifle steady in weathered hands. At 42, his face was a map of hard choices and harder losses, eyes still sharp despite the burdens they'd witnessed. 6 years. 6 long, silent years since he'd buried Sarah and little Emily. The drought had taken nearly everything else. All that remained was this fortress of solitude he'd built with his own hands, and the memories that haunted every corner. Movement caught his eye, dust clouds rising in the eastern ridge. Riders coming fast. Mason adjusted his scope, the familiar weight of the rifle an extension of his body. Old instincts never died, not for a former Union scout of the 4th Cavalry Regiment. Not today, he muttered, tracking the riders through his scope. Something wasn't right. The riders disappeared behind a rocky outcropping, but Mason spotted blood on the trail, fresh tracks splitting off from the main group. He descended the ladder, boots hitting the parched earth with practiced silence. The heat pressed against him like a physical force as he followed the divergent tracks, leading away from the main trail toward his fallen fence line. That's when he saw her, a small Apache girl, no more than 7, crumpled against a fence post. Her deerskin dress was dark with blood from a gunshot wound in her shoulder. An empty canteen lay beside her tiny hand. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, desperate movements. Mason hesitated. His hand drifted unconsciously to the scar that ran from his collarbone to his ribs. A brutal souvenir from a raid years ago. The war had taught him to fear what was different, to hate, but the war had ended. Memory flashed unbidden. Emily's small face consumed by fever, calling for water he couldn't provide. The girl before him now had the same delicate features, the same innocence untouched by the cruelty of the world that had claimed her. In one fluid motion, Mason knelt beside the child. Field medicine came back instantly. Skills learned stitching up fellow soldiers under Confederate fire. He pressed a bandana against the wound, stemming the bleeding. "Hang on, little one," he said, uncorking his own canteen. The last of his water trickled between her cracked lips. Her eyes fluttered, but didn't open. Death had taken enough from these lands. It wouldn't take her too. Mason lifted the child, light as dried corn husks, and headed back toward the ranch house. The weight of her small body awakened something long buried beneath grief and solitude. Inside his fortress, Mason laid the girl on his bed, the same one where Sarah had drawn her final breath. As he cleaned the wound, memories surfaced like wreckage from a sunken ship. The war, the screams, the orders he'd refused to follow when General Sullivan commanded the unit to fire on that village. A sound outside pulled his attention away. His rifle was in his hands before conscious thought took over. Through the window, he spotted them, 3 Apache women at the edge of his property. But not ordinary women. They stood tall and proud, warriors in their own right. Mason moved silently to his watchtower, lifting his field glasses. The tallest wore leadership markings, her braided hair adorned with eagle feathers. The youngest had a bow strung across her back and a cavalry sword at her hip. The eldest's face was mapped with the deep lines of one who had witnessed generations pass. With practiced efficiency, Mason positioned himself, sighted down the barrel, and emerged onto the porch. "Stand where you are or die where you stand," he called out, voice rough from disuse. The women halted. The leader stepped forward, chin raised defiantly. "We come for the child you have taken," she said in clear English. "She is the daughter of our chief." Mason's finger rested against the trigger. "She's got a bullet hole that says someone else wanted her first." The leader's eyes narrowed. "I am Elena. We are her protectors. The child you saved is Naya, daughter of Chief Makia and keeper of sacred knowledge." "Sacred knowledge don't stop bullets," Mason replied. Who put the hole in her? A moment of silence stretched between them. Finally, Elena spoke. A man you know well, the one who builds dams and steals water. Your former commander, General Sullivan. The name hit Mason like a physical blow. General Marshall Sullivan, the butcher of Broken Creek, the man who'd ordered the massacre of civilians and court-martialed Mason when he refused to participate. Sullivan's in these parts? His voice remained steady despite the thunder in his chest. He controls the water now, said Elena, and he will come for the girl. Mason's jaw clenched. Then with deliberate slowness, he lowered his rifle. You'd better come inside. Inside the cabin, tension filled the air like gun smoke as the Apache women gathered around Naya. The eldest, Myra, examined the wound with knowing hands while Elena stood guard, her gaze never leaving Mason. You have skill, Myra said without looking up, but she needs medicine from our valley. Before Mason could respond, Naya's eyes fluttered open. She looked directly at him, her gaze far too knowing for a child. You fought beside my father, she said in perfect English, at Broken Creek. You stood against the yellow-haired soldier who ordered death. You said no. The room seemed to grow colder. 6 years since that day, since he'd refused Sullivan's order to fire on the village. Since the court-martial that ended his military career but saved his soul. Mason studied the child's face, searching for deception. Finding none, he made a decision he knew he might regret. I'll help you, he said simply, but not because of old ghosts. What he didn't say, what 6 years of solitude had taught him, was that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. But debt was something he understood. He owed these people nothing. Except that wasn't entirely true. It had been an Apache healer who tried to save Sarah and Emily during the fever outbreak. When the town doctor refused to come, claiming it was God's will that the Reed family suffer. The medicine hadn't worked, arrived too late, but the attempt had meant something. One debt repaid. That was all this was. Part 2, Blood and Water. They rode out at noon, heat shimmering off the rocks like spirits rising. Mason led in his stallion Thunder, with Myra behind on a paint mare. His Sharps rifle rested across his lap, loaded and ready. Back at the ranch, Elena and Tala remained with Naya, fortifying the perimeter against Sullivan's inevitable attack. Your people ambushed from the East Ridge, Mason said, eyes scanning the terrain. Used to be their favorite spot during the conflicts. Myra's weathered face betrayed nothing. You fought against the people, tracked for the army, never fired on women or children, yet you know our ways. Know my enemy, know myself. They rode in silence after that, following a dry creek bed toward the foothills. The landscape told its own story to those who could read it. Disturbed rocks, broken twigs, tracks hastily covered. Mason reined in suddenly, raising his hand for silence. A prairie hawk circled overhead, but unnaturally, its pattern too deliberate. We're being watched, he whispered. The ambush came swift as a rattlesnake strike. 6 Apache warriors appeared from the rocks, arrows nocked. Their leader, a tall man with a scarred face and hatred in his eyes, spoke rapid Apache to Myra. Coda says you are a traitor, Myra translated, for bringing the white soldier to our sacred grounds. Mason didn't lower his rifle. Tell him I'm bringing medicine for the chief's daughter. When Myra translated, Coda's expression darkened. He knocked an arrow and aimed directly at Mason's heart. What happened next unfolded in heartbeats. Coda loosed his arrow. Mason fired the Sharps, the bullet splitting the arrow mid-flight. Before the echo faded, he levered in another round and put a bullet through the shoulder of the warrior to Coda's right. 2 more arrows flew. Mason rolled from his saddle, coming up with his Colt Navy revolver, firing twice. 1 warrior fell. Another clutched a bleeding thigh. Coda charged with a war club. Mason sidestepped, years of hand-to-hand combat flooding back. He caught the club, twisted, and drove his boot into Koda's knee. Bone cracked like dry timber. The remaining warriors hesitated, then fled, dragging their wounded. Silence returned to the valley, broken only by the heavy breathing of man and horse. Myra stared at Mason with new eyes. "You spared them." "Killing's easy," Mason said, reloading his weapons. "Living with it's the hard part." Blood trickled down his arm where an arrowhead had grazed him. Myra approached cautiously, tearing a strip from her dress. "Koda is Elena's brother," she said, binding his wound. "He believes all white men are like Sullivan." "Maybe he's right," Mason muttered. "No." Myra's eyes held his. "A man like Sullivan would have killed them all." As they continued their journey, Myra shared the story of Sullivan's rise to power. After his military career, he had returned to the territory with financial backing from Eastern investors. He built dams across the rivers, controlling the water flow during the worst drought in memory. People paid whatever he demanded. Those who couldn't pay lost their farms, their livelihoods, their lives. The Soi Tiang, what you would call the sacred spring, is the last water source he does not control, Myra explained, hidden deep within Apache lands, guarded by ancient protectors. "And the girl knows where it is," Mason concluded. "Naya carries the map in her mind. She was born with the gift of dreams. She sees what others cannot." They collected the medicine plants in silence after that, each lost in thought. As they prepared to return, Myra hesitated. "There is something you should know," she said finally, "about Koda." Mason tied the medicine bundle to his saddle. "What about him?" "He works for Sullivan now. He believes the old ways are dying, that his people must adapt or perish." "He's a traitor." "He is lost," Myra corrected, "as you were once lost." The accusation stung, but Mason couldn't deny its truth. After the court-martial, he had wandered, consumed by bitterness and whiskey, until Sarah had found him and pulled him back from the edge. "Sullivan will use Koda," Mason said, "then discard him when he's no longer useful." "I fear you are right," Myra replied, "and when that happens, blood will flow like water." They returned to the ranch at dusk, medicine bundles secured. What greeted them was Elena standing guard at the gate, her face grim. "Riders spotted," she said without preamble. 15 men, armed, coming from the east." "Sullivan," Mason said, dismounting. "How's the girl?" "Tala tends her. The fever breaks and returns." Mason handed the medicine bundle to Elena, then strode toward the house. Mind already calculating angles. Cover, lines of fire. The training never left. The soldier merely slept. Inside, he unlocked a trunk beneath his bed. Union Army Springfield rifle, 2 Colt Navy revolvers, ammunition, a cavalry saber with blood rust still on the blade, the tools of his former trade. As night fell, Mason gathered the women around a map of the ranch. "We're outnumbered," he said bluntly, "but we have position. They'll come at first light, expecting to find a lone man and a wounded child. Instead, they'll find 4 defenders with overlapping fields of fire." Tala, the young warrior, studied the map intently. "What of escape routes?" "The North Ridge. There's a trail that—" "No," Naya's voice interrupted from the doorway. She stood there, pale but determined, the medicine having done its work. "They will come through the tunnel." Mason turned. "What tunnel?" "The one beneath the North Ridge," Naya said. "The one that comes up behind the barn. Koda showed it to Sullivan's men today." Elena's face drained of color. "How do you know this?" "I saw it in my dreams. Koda leads them. He has betrayed us all." Mason and Elena exchanged glances. Their defensive plan had just collapsed. "Change of plans," Mason said, reaching for more ammunition. "We're going to need the Gatling gun." As they prepared for battle, Mason found himself alone with Naya. The child watched him with those unsettling ancient eyes. Why did you refuse? She asked suddenly. At Broken Creek, why did you say no when the other said yes? Mason cleaned his rifle, mechanical movements that required no thought. Those were women and children, non-combatants. That is what you told the court? Naya persisted. But not why. Not really. Mason's hands stilled. The memory rose unbidden. The Apache village. The families gathered for a ceremony, unaware of the soldiers surrounding them. Sullivan's cold order. Kill them all. Let God sort them out. Because once you cross that line, Mason said finally, there's no coming back. A man who murders innocents stops being a man. Sullivan crossed that line long ago, Naya said. Yes, Mason agreed. And now he's after the sacred spring. Not just the water, Naya corrected. He wants what the water protects. Which is? Naya touched the medallion around her neck. A simple stone circle etched with symbols Mason didn't recognize. Power, she said simply, the kind that corrupts even the purest heart. As she spoke, Mason realized a terrible truth. Sullivan hadn't come just for the water, or even for whatever power the girl spoke of. He had come to silence the last witness to his war crimes, Mason Reed, the man who had refused his order and lived to testify against him. The battle for Triple R Ranch wouldn't just be about water or ancient power. It would be about settling old scores, about burying the truth beneath blood and dust. And Mason had just put a target on everyone under his roof. Part 3, Honor's Last Stand. Dawn painted the eastern sky blood red when Sullivan's men appeared on the horizon. 15 riders spread in a skirmish line, led by a heavy-set man in an officer's coat despite the heat. Even at distance, Mason recognized the posture, the arrogance. General Marshal Sullivan. Older, grayer, but unmistakable. From his position atop the barn, Mason tracked the approaching riders through his scope. Standard cavalry approach. Predictable. But where was Coda? Where was the flanking force that would use the tunnel? Beside him, Tala remained silent, bow ready. Elena and Myra were positioned in the house with Naya. The Gatling gun waited, concealed beneath canvas in the yard, aimed at the tunnel exit. Sullivan's men halted just out of effective rifle range. The general rode forward alone, a white flag in his hand, a mockery of military protocol. Reed, Sullivan's voice carried across the stillness. I know you're there, Lieutenant. We have unfinished business. Mason remained silent, finger resting alongside the trigger guard. I'm here for the Apache girl. Hand her over and I'll let you live. Refuse and I'll burn this place to the ground. 6 years of hatred crystallized in Mason's chest. Sullivan, the man who'd ordered the death of innocents, the man whose brutal tactics had driven Mason from the army he'd once been proud to serve, the man who now wanted to capture a child to find water he could sell to desperate people. Some men never stopped being monsters, they just found new victims. Reed, last chance. Mason sighted down the barrel, centering the crosshairs on Sullivan's chest. One shot. Just as 6 years delayed, his finger tightened on the trigger. Then he saw them. Movement from the North Ridge. Shadows against shadows. Coda and at least 20 Apache warriors working with Sullivan, heading for the tunnel entrance. Mason lowered his rifle. Tala, he whispered. Signal Elena. They're coming through the tunnel. Tala nodded, sending a bird call across the yard. The real battle was about to begin. The first explosion rocked the ground beneath the North Ridge. Mason had mined the tunnel entrance during the night. An old army trick. Screams echoed across the rocks. Sullivan, realizing his surprise attack was compromised, signaled his men forward. Gunfire erupted across the ranch yard. Mason's first shot dropped Sullivan's lieutenant from his horse. His second shattered the knee of a rider, trying to reach the water tower. The third went wide as a bullet splintered the wood beside his head. Tala's arrows found targets with deadly precision. One rider, then another, fell clutching feathered shafts in their chests and throats. From the house, Elena's rifle barked in regular intervals, each shot followed by a cry or a thud of a falling body. But Sullivan had numbers. His men pressed forward, taking cover behind rocks and troughs. Return fire forced Mason and Tala to duck behind the barn roof parapet. Then came the sound Mason had been dreading, shouting from inside the barn, the tunnel. Despite the explosion, some of Koda's warriors had broken through. "Cover me!" Mason yelled, sliding down the ladder into the barn loft. Below, chaos reigned. 3 Apache warriors engaged with Myra, who fought with the ferocity of a mountain lion, her knife a blur of motion. But she was outnumbered. Mason's Colt barked twice. One warrior fell. The second turned, catching Mason's third shot in the shoulder. The third warrior, Koda himself, tackled Myra to the ground, knife raised. Mason leaped from the loft, driving his shoulder into Koda with bone-crushing force. They tumbled across the dirt floor, each fighting for dominance. Koda's knife slashed Mason's arm. Mason drove his fist into Koda's wounded knee. The Apache howled in pain but fought on, hatred giving him strength beyond reason. "You protect them," Koda spat in broken English. "White man who kills my people." "I never killed women or children," Mason grunted, blocking another knife thrust. "Sullivan say you lead attack on village." Understanding dawned amid the struggle. Sullivan lied. He ordered the attack. I refused. Doubt flickered in Koda's eyes. Just enough distraction for Mason to drive his knee upward, breaking Koda's grip. The knife clattered away. "He burns your village," Mason pressed. "Takes your water. Uses you against your own sister." Outside, gunfire intensified. Glass shattered in the house. A woman's scream. Elena or Naya. Mason couldn't tell. Koda hesitated. Years of hatred warring with dawning truth. "Choose now," Mason said, releasing his grip and stepping back. "Sullivan or your people?" For one heartbeat, the outcome balanced on a knife's edge. Then Koda reached a decision, nodded once, and grabbed his fallen knife, but turned toward the tunnel instead of Mason. "Get Naya," he said. "I stopped my warriors." Mason didn't wait to see if Koda would keep his word. He charged toward the house, every step contested. A bullet grazed his temple. Another buried itself in his thigh. Still, he moved forward, reloading the Colt with mechanical precision. Inside, he found Elena wounded but standing, Naya behind her. 3 dead attackers testified to Elena's lethal skill. "Tala?" Elena asked, blood streaming from a cut above her eye. "Still fighting. Myra's with her." Mason checked his ammunition. 2 rounds in the Colt. Springfield empty. "We need to move. House is surrounded." "Nowhere to go," Elena said grimly. Naya tugged at Mason's sleeve. "The cellar. Father's warriors will come." "What warriors?" Mason demanded. "Your village was destroyed." Hope flared in Elena's eyes. "The message. When Naya escaped, she carried a message to the southern tribes." Before Mason could respond, the front door exploded inward. Marshal Sullivan stood in the doorway, revolver in hand, gray uniform stained with dust and blood. "Lieutenant Reed," he said, voice still carrying that aristocratic southern drawl. "Still fighting lost causes, I see." Mason positioned himself between Sullivan and the women. "Only cause I lost was believing in men like you." Sullivan's smile never reached his eyes. "The girl comes with me. The Apache woman, too, if she's willing to be reasonable. You, however," he raised his revolver, "are long overdue for a traitor's death." Time slowed. Mason saw Sullivan's finger tighten on the trigger, saw Elena lunging forward. Too late to intercept. Saw Naya's eyes wide with terror. The gunshot cracked across the room. Sullivan staggered, confusion replacing arrogance as blood blossomed on his chest. He turned disbelieving, to face Coda standing in the doorway, smoking pistol in hand. "You!" Sullivan gasped. "For my people," Coda said quietly. Sullivan raised his gun with desperate strength. Mason's Colt fired simultaneously with Coda's second shot. Sullivan collapsed, dead before he hit the floor. Silence fell, broken only by the distant sounds of fighting. Then from outside came a new sound. War cries. Dozens, then hundreds of voices rising in unison. Thundering hoofbeats shook the earth. Naya smiled. "Father comes." Sunrise painted the desert gold 3 days later. The battle had ended with Sullivan's men fleeing before the combined might of 3 Apache tribes. Those who surrendered were allowed to leave, weaponless, with a warning never to return. Mason stood before the ruined dam, watching as Apache warriors and a handful of local settlers, people who had suffered under Sullivan's water tyranny, worked together to breach the final section. Beside him stood Elena, her wounded arm bound but healing. Beyond them, Naya sat with Myra, learning the medicine ways that were her birthright. "Water will flow again," Elena said. "The valley will heal." Mason nodded, eyes fixed on the dam. "Won't bring back those who died for it. No, but their sacrifice brings life to those who remain." The final charges detonated. Stone and timber gave way before dynamite and determination. Water rushed through the breach, a roaring testament to freedom regained. Chief Makia approached, his presence commanding respect without words. He extended his hand to Mason, not in the white man's handshake, but palm up, offering something. A silver U.S. cavalry badge, tarnished with age. "You drop this," Makia said in perfect English, "the day you refused to fire on our village." Mason stared at the badge, the symbol of everything he'd once believed in, corrupted by men like Sullivan, redeemed by his own choice 6 years ago. "Keep it," Mason said. "Reminder that not all battles are fought with guns." Makia nodded, understanding passing between warriors who had seen too much death. "The water flows for all people," the chief declared, "but we need someone to stand at the border between our worlds, someone both sides respect." Mason understood the offer. A purpose, a place, things he'd lost when Sarah and Emily died. "I've fought enough for one lifetime," he said slowly, "but I'll stand with those who value honor." Naya approached, carrying Mason's field glasses. She'd barely left his side since the battle, fascinated by the tools and weapons of the white man's world. "Will you teach me?" she asked, holding up the glasses. "To see far?" Mason knelt, adjusting the glasses for her smaller face. "These won't help unless you know what to look for. And you will show me." For the first time in 6 years, Mason Reed smiled. Not the full, carefree smile of his youth. That man was gone forever. But something new, something tempered by loss yet unbroken. "Yes, little one, I'll show you." 1 year later, Triple R Ranch had transformed. No longer just a cattle operation, it had become a trading post where Apache and settler alike could exchange goods fairly. The water flowed for all, maintained by a council of both peoples. Mason sat on his porch, Winchester across his lap, more from habit than necessity. The setting sun turned the desert to flame, shadows lengthening across land that had begun to heal from drought's long grip. Elena stood beside him, their relationship one of deep respect rather than romance. 2 warriors who had found honor in each other's different worlds. From the distance came the sound of approaching riders. Naya, now strong and healthy, ran ahead to the watchtower, using Mason's field glasses with practiced skill. "Wagon train," she called down. 20 people, women and children among them. Mason nodded, rising to his feet. "New day, new challenges." He checked his weapons out of habit, then looked at Elena. No words were needed between them. They had forged something stronger than the bonds of blood or love, a pact written in sacrifice and sealed with honor. "We are ready," Elena said simply. As the sun sank below the horizon, Mason Reed walked toward the approaching wagons. A man who had lost everything yet found something worth fighting for. A future where different peoples could share the same precious gift. Water in a thirsty land, and the honor that flows stronger than blood.